All right, friends, welcome back again to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. This YouTube channel is dedicated to helping you get better at Bannerlord through the use of field command and advanced tactics. And we're going to continue along with our infantry series here. This series is dedicated to looking at infantry on a more granular level. We've already looked at different types of infantries, different formations, and we've already had one demonstration battle where we performed some flanking, surround and destroy tactics on the enemy. This battle here, I've searched a little bit on my map, I've wandered around a little bit, and I've looked for a Valandian force that had a lot of cavalry. And lo and behold, we found one. So we're going to fight this Valandian force with our infantry heavy force. Of course, we'll use normal player damage here. And we will try a few tactics here. These tactics really kind of boil down to slowing down the enemy heavy cav. We'll use our spearmen, we'll use very specific infantry units in the front, and then once those enemy units are slowed down, then we can pelt them with javelins. We'll have two different skirmisher divisions, and we'll use our shock troop division, our third division here, to attack the enemy once they're slowed down. So again, this comes off the weaknesses, the strengths and weaknesses of the different units. Your shock troops are highly vulnerable to cavalry. Now, some units, some shock troops do better than others. For example, the elite Manavliaton, they tend to spear horses pretty decently with their Manavliaton. And then they can also swing a big nasty roundhouse swing at incoming cavalry, but they're still highly vulnerable compared to, say, a spearman. The Sturgian heavy spearman is outstanding against cavalry because of the length of his spear. It just so happens that the AI does an outstanding job of spearing incoming cavalry, which of course stands the horse up on end, and then other units can attack. So we're going to demonstrate here in this battle. Again, we've broken down our infantry in 4 different divisions. I'm going to tinker around with the numbers here and the composition a little bit, and this is something that you'll want to do too. And I think we will use some of this terrain. There isn't much terrain here, right? This is basically the worst case scenario to fight Valandia in this wide open setting. But that's partly the reason I chose this map. I don't want to give us any kind of undue advantages here against this force. I sort of want to demonstrate how to tackle them on, what you could call like the hardest difficulty. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is tinker with my infantry. This is my first division, and again, if you're going to be fighting your battles on a granular level, I would recommend you do this, right? So I'm zooming in here, and I recognize that a lot of these are the Sturgian spearmen. I recognize other spearmen here like the Valandian sergeant. I want my spearmen in the first division because they're going to form effectively a wall that protects us from the enemy. We're going to have essentially 2 different walls. We're going to have one wall of infantry and then one wall of cav. Now the cav wall is obviously different. If you're not familiar with the cav shield wall, the main reason it's effective is because the horses basically slow down the enemy attack. In fact, in some ways, it's more effective than infantry. Even if you have a line of spearmen, a line of horsemen can be devastatingly effective to a cav charge, and it just has to do with the game mechanics. They don't seem to charge very well through even a single line of horses, as you'll see here. So we're using this little rock point just to have another nice little anchor. Any cav that charge at the center there will be kind of stood up by those rocks, and that'll help slow the enemy down. Because again, ultimately what we're trying to do here with the enemy is kill their momentum. We don't want them barreling through and getting to our weaker units, right? We're going to have archers towards the back, and I will show you setting those guys up as well. We have 114 archers and crossbowmen. And then we have 2 different skirmisher divisions. So I've locked off the first, so their units won't change. And I'm going to steal a little bit from my other units here because I want a few more shock troops in that 3rd division. That's our shock troop division. It's specialized. I want these guys to be mostly Manavliatons, mostly these Sturgian heroic line breakers, palace guards, etc. Now you do see a few guys mixed in here that have shields, and that's simply because we don't have enough shock troops to field, a huge unit. So this 44 guys we're actually going to put in a line directly behind the cavalry. And this is a strategy or a tactic that I call shield and shock. And the idea is very simple. This infantry line here is very vulnerable to cav charges and to archers. The cav will charge in, knock them to the ground, spear them, etc. And then, of course, archers will just annihilate these guys with arrow fire at range. Because most of these guys don't have shields, they are highly vulnerable to archers. So we give them this, the football analogy, we give them this offensive line in front of them that protects them, not entirely, but protects them from a lot of arrows, and it, of course, protects them from cav charges. Then, as the enemy comes up and charges these cav, some of the cav will get through, but not very many. Then we send in these war dogs to attack, right? I'll be micromanaging this third infantry in this battle more than all the other units. Micromanaging, if you're not familiar, is just the use of extra commands to tell your troops repeatedly to do exactly what you want them to, right? Charge, get back here, follow me, pull back, things like that. The more micromanaging you do, obviously, the more difficult Bannerlord gets. And what I mean from that is, as a field commander, if you can have your units sort of on fire and forget it, to use a parlance, it's much easier than as a battlefield commander, because those units are they're just operating on their own, and you don't have to think about them very much, right? So I will be micromanaging this third division. You'll see me using them and talking about them a lot in this battle. But the other units here in this battle against the Valandians here, there's actually not a whole lot of micromanaging necessary. And part of the reason is that's because the AI doesn't do a good job with its heavy cav. It won't circle you and then slam you from behind and in the front with heavy cav. It has a very bad habit of directly attacking your two angles here. And hence, this is why we have our defensive formation here, right? It's going to kind of resemble this half diamond shape towards the enemy. Incidentally, you can form this formation with a skein. The problem with it is that a skein has infantry on both sides, and it can be kind of thin. I find a cav line on one side and an infantry line, especially if you can double up some of the guys like this, does a better job of slowing down and stopping heavy cav. Now, some are going to get through. This is not like an impervious barrier, but as you'll see, it's quite effective. And then, of course, directly behind this, I've already set these guys up, but now I'll mention these guys. These are our skirmishers. All of these guys behind that infantry line should have throwing weapons. Now, unfortunately, the game doesn't do a brilliant, perfect job of putting guys with throwing weapons. These guys right here have none. These are legionnaires. They have no throwing weapons, and yet they're in this division. Still, 95% of the guys in this division either have throwing axes, or better yet, they have javelins. Similarly, over here in the 6th Division, right, they have throwing weapons, they have javelins, and so we're going to stick them right there, right? That's going to be paramount to our strategy, is using our javelins, and the idea here is very simple. The enemy, again, gets stacked up or slowed down by our cav line, by our infantry line. That makes them slower moving targets, at which point our archers and javelins can lay waste to them, right? In this division right here, I've got a captain who's extremely high level. Look at this fucking guy's perks. It's literally the whole screen. You want to assign a good captain, and notice the skill he has. Increased melee damage against mounted troops. That's because at some point or other, these guys will be out of ammunition, and if I charge in this situation with that shock line right there, these guys will also be doing major damage to that slowed down cavalry, right? Finally, we put the archers back here, and I say finally, there are a couple other units that I'm going to position, but they're not as important. This is our archers, and I'm just putting in a big kind of separated mass like that, because that gives them somewhat protection from these two lines. Again, picture the enemy's going to be charging in from the angles here. Some will come in front towards the front, and they'll run into that rock face and be slowed down as well some. But we want our archers back here, and we want them to have a good line of sight. Frankly, right now, these guys don't have the best line of sight, and so I'm actually going to move them like this. And you want to go in, and I've mentioned this before in other episodes, you want to sort of pretend like these are your troops and zoom in a little bit and be like, okay, this guy back here, he can't see much, right? He can't see over his other troops and this little ridge. So actually this formation here and this rock wall is impeding our strategy. I'm actually going to change strategy on the fly here. I want these guys shooting downhill. I want them to have an angle. Because in this battle, even though archers aren't the priority, they're still going to be doing some damage in this battle, and we want to position them correctly. So just a moment to set up the same lines. All of this should look very familiar, right? This is the 6th, the 4th, and again, we're going to put the 3rd kind of in a line behind this cav wall. Then we have some other cav lines here. We've got the 7th and 8th. These are horse archers and our elite 8th division. And all we're going to do with these units is provide additional protection to the rest of our units. Right here, I'm sort of tightening up the line so that there's less opening there for the enemy to come through. Skirmishers go behind, and this might take you a little bit to set this up. That said, this is the easiest time to set up your units in battle, right? There's nothing happening. There's nobody charging in. There's not something dramatic happening. This is where you have time to set up your units, okay? All right, so those units are set up. We will get the crossbowmen now set up in a big long arc like I intended earlier. And then we're just going to use our other divisions here, the horse archers and my elite knights, to further sort of make it difficult for enemy cav to charge in here, right? On this far right flank, there's actually a couple infantrymen here. There's at least a few more horses to sort of clog up the lanes and make it difficult for the enemy to charge us. All right. Now we wait, right? The enemy heavy horse is going to approach. It looks like they've got a fair bit of crossbow, 174 crossbowmen and 83 infantry. The numbers on the top, I've said this before, I'll mention it again just because we have a second. That represents how many troops in the division. And then the types, of course, the icon. They have 37 horse archers and 174 archers. I hope all of that is clear to folks. And then I can't see, it's either 268 heavy cav or 368. And it looks like 268. Again, the bottom number is the distance away, so I'm 2 football fields away, 200 yards away from the units, 200 meters. If you use the better metric system, for some reason or other, our ignorant fucking country in the United States refuses to go to the metric system, even though it's clearly superior. But I won't. I'll stay off my soapbox for this episode. All right, so there's a handful of idiotic stragglers that are pouring in ahead of the enemy cav here, and the heavy cav looks like it's starting to form up in very large lines to charge us. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to slow things down as they approach so you can see some of the effectiveness of it. But I'm also I'm going to explain what we're doing as it's happening. Right? Okay, so here they come. These guys are charging. You can see them lowering their spears and barreling in. And what's going to happen is these guys' progress is going to be reduced by all these heavy horse that they're going to hit. Some of the guys are going to get speared, too. Some of these guys, even in the skirmisher line, have spears. Now, they're still getting through. Right? It's not impervious, like I said. But much less guys are getting through than if you didn't have this strong, heavy cav line there. Now, they didn't really attack our first infantry very much, right? They just kind of sort of waded through on this right flank and kind of ignored that flank. That said, now look how slow the enemy's moving, right? This is where you send in the third. This third division has been patiently waiting here in a line. Now they get told to charge. We're also going to charge with the 6 skirmishers here because we want these guys with their offensive skills going to work. And look at the cav now. The cav is stood up and can't move. It can't retreat because of our cav. And you can see the death spam. The death spam is very negative for the enemy. I'm also going to send in the first here because there's not that many cav. And what I mean by sending in is I'm just having these guys attack. Right, that's actually the first guy I swung my pole arm at. And you can see the death spam. These slowed down heavy cav are now getting mauled by shock troops and the other heavy infantry. You see them in lavelatons and whatnot wailing away. All of these crossbowmen at the back, they're basically protected, and so they're shooting unimpeded. You can just see the guys getting shot off their horses left and right. And we still have a layer of protection from the enemy crossbow, right? They're firing at us still. Their bolts are still going at us. But that cav wave just dissolved. It's just gone. And so we're going to advance sort of to the next stage of this battle, right? We've already destroyed. Here, we'll just send our cav after these retreating crossbowmen before we set up the next wave of this attack. So I'm going to kind of speed it up here. We're going to move our crossbowmen quickly forward. And I'm going to move my infantry, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes rather. If you want your units to move quicker, move them in a line formation. If they move in shield wall, in fact, I'll move one unit in shield wall and one in line, and you'll just be able to see. The line wave is going to move much slower, or excuse me, the shield wall line is going to move much slower, and the line wave will move much faster. In fact, you can see they're just totally leaving in the dust this division that's in shield wall, and that's because those guys are back there in shield wall, and so they're walking like these robots with their shields in front of them, and look at all the other units are just leaving them in the dust. So again, that's just emphatic point to that you want to use your units in formations correctly for the circumstances you're in. In this circumstance, we want to move up quickly. Part of the reason I'm doing that is just so this episode doesn't take 40 minutes. But the other reason we're doing that, of course, is that we're trying to get on the next phase of battle with the enemy. All right. So they're retreating quite a ways. Now, what we want to do is we want to use terrain, if at all possible, to fight the enemy. I'm kind of keeping an eye on them. Reconnaissance is essential as a field commander, right? You you will want to have good reconnaissance, and that's why this game is very difficult to play correctly if you're always on foot. I can't imagine actually any good reasons for always playing on foot. There's some good reasons to play on foot at times because you'll level up your athletic skills and whatnot. But I think no matter what, even if you're going to play as a barbarian who plays on foot most of the time, you're still going to want to have the ability to jump on a horse for reconnaissance, basically to alter, not alter, but to basically get a better view of the battlefield and control your troops from a standing point, right? Now, in this instance, I actually got kind of caught off guard there. While I'm doing all this other instruction, obviously, I'm not commanding as well as I should be optimally. And so I actually had the 3rd Division out in front there somewhat vulnerably. Fortunately, the enemy had sort of a weak cav charge, and it didn't amount to much. But that could have been basically a mistake as the commander here. Now this, I've done this 1,000 times in my own battle, so it's easy for me. But this is just me setting up the lines identical to how we set them up earlier in this battle, right? If you have a hard time sort of visualizing the battlefield, you can use the RTS mod. That's the overhead view. But unless you want to play in that like highly non-immersive way of the game, I would recommend that you get better at doing it from the field like I'm doing here, right? You have to have sort of good spatial awareness. No doubt my career as a firefighter has really helped me with that, right? When we do searches of rooms in the dark, obviously our brains develop a pretty good understanding of sort of distances and what things look like without seeing them from the most optimal angle. All right, so we're spreading out our units here. It kind of looks like a ranged jousting battle at this stage. The enemy is sort of shooting us with a handful of crossbowmen there. They do have some cavity. It's 97 over here and 97 over there. So we're going to enact the same strategy again, right? We're going to be in our little group here. The skirmishers are here. The 3rd Division, again, we're going to move up right behind the enemy cav. Because as these guys charge and they get stood up, you can see a lot of them just get stopped in their tracks. Now you send in the 3rd. And these guys with their two-handed weapons, these palace guards, very quickly are going to arrive at the enemy. And they're going to be wailing away, like this guy right in front of me. They're going to be wailing away with their Volge, with their Manabliaton. And usually in this instance, if you do this correctly, they're going to be attacking cav that can't move very well, right? These cav are slowed down. This guy in front of me, these cav in front of me, they're slowed down, they're stopped. And so our Manabliatons are attacking them. They're wailing away on them. And heavy cav is going to have a very hard time in this circumstance. That's one of the keys to fighting heavy cav, is slowing them down. As soon as they're slowed down, these guys are basically fucking dead meat. You see them getting wailed off their horses left and right. They're shot off their horses, etc. All right, so the enemy now has a lot of crossbow. It's time to just close in the net and finish this episode here. We're going to basically move up these different units. I've got the 4th skirmishers, the 6th skirmishers, the 1st infantry. All of these guys are now in shield wall because we are close enough to the enemy that I want protection. I don't need to move quickly. I want these guys holding their shields up. We're going to move the 2nd cav up as well. And all we're doing is just sort of systematically closing in the net here on the enemy. In fact, just to make it even nastier on the enemy, although it looks like they're, you know what? Okay, so they're peeling back over yet another ridge, so we're going to pursue. So I just told all of the units at the same time, line position, right? I selected 0 and said line position, and then I said follow me. It's 2 very quick commands that you as the battlefield commander eventually will want to master, because that'll allow you very, very quickly to change formations and adjust to the circumstances that you're in. Similarly, you want to master things like fall back, right? You want to be able to hit a button, it's 0, 1, F1, F5, and have everybody fall back at a moment's notice, right? If you come over a ridge and you're just facing this nasty onslaught of the enemy that surprises you, you don't want to be fumbling around looking for your commands of what to do next, right? You're going to want to be operating quickly as a field commander so that everything is pretty fluent. I mentioned it before, it's a little bit like language. If your language is poor and you're in Russia, the next thing you know, they're accusing you of bringing in marijuana, and your prison sentence is life. All right, so we're kind of using this angle here on the flank, and this portion of the battle, what this is we're going to be demonstrating, of course, how to systematically destroy archers. None of this is like, you know, state-of-the-art incredible tactics. The bottom line here is we're just going to be using what's called shield and shock tactics. A shield wall in the front, of course, and then skirmishers, archers, and shock troops behind. I'm trying not to fight that much in battles like this a lot of times, especially in my campaign. You know, I'm wailing away on the enemy as well. But I'm trying to sort of limit that here because nobody's really interested in watching me around with my overpowered character destroying people. Sometimes I can't help it, so bear with me here. Again, just like commanding my units, some of this is sort of instinctual. Now, if you can see what I'm doing here, all I'm doing is taking my different shield walls and moving them up like in collective lines so that there's a nice big thick wall of shields towards the front, right? I want their arrows hitting our shields, not our troops, and then filtering in behind them, I'm bringing in the rest of our units. Okay, so this is a perfect example. I don't want those guys to attack, and because there's units there, the way that the UI works is it told them to attack. You just simply tell them to fall back, or you tell them to stop, right? The other thing you can do, of course, is you can just simply draw a new position line for them, and they'll stop attacking. All right, so we're going to continue to move these guys up. I'm going to speed this process up just a bit. And you notice each time I'm putting the infantry out in front, 1st, 4th, 6th, and the 3rd get tucked in behind them. That's because these guys, again, these shock troops, they don't have shields. I want to try and protect them. Of course, the crossbow will go all the way behind. The cav gets moved up in front. And I'm just kind of off to the side here with the 7th and 8th. I don't really even need the 7th and 8th Corps in this battle. Next step. All right. We want to surround the enemy in this situation. They have 321 crossbow and 177 infantry. Anytime and all times possible. If you have a bunch of infantry like like we have here, you want to use them to surround the enemy. Now you notice we're using our skirmishers just like the other infantry line. We're moving them up. If you have weaker skirmishers, that's not going to work really well because they won't have good armor. They won't have good weapon skills. But in this case, most of our skirmishers are tier 4 or tier 5, and so it's going to work just fine. Incidentally, of course, once you get going at Bannerlord, I imagine a lot of the people that are watching this, you should have an army of at least 60-70% of tier 4 and tier 5 units, tier 6 as well, right? You should not have a bunch of scrubs. If you do, somehow you're not upgrading your units right, or there's some other problem, right? You should definitely be getting an elite army very early on, right? This is it's going to be expensive, but the power of an army that's 70-80% elite units compared to the other units is just absolutely overwhelming. Yeah, see, so it wants to charge over there, so I just simply tell those guys, no, I want you to reform a new line. I don't want you guys charging. I want you guys doing exactly what I'm telling you to. So these infantry over here, all we're doing here is closing in the gap. And again, I'm having my 3rd command, or my 3rd unit, follow me slowly, right? We just want to get these guys into battle slowly. So the 1st is over here now, basically on top of the enemy. I'm going to have them charge. I want those guys engaging because they're in a good position to attack the enemy. The 2nd cav, I've just left here. I'm not even going to attack with them. But the 4th and the 6th that are also sort of flanking the enemy, I want them attacking. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to drag the 3rd infantry right to the side of the enemy along with the 7th and the 8th. Those are our elite units because we want these guys that are moving fast cutting off the exit for the enemy here. Again, I mentioned before, a lot of times my 3rd Corps will have the speed banner, right? And so they're moving extra fast. You can see they just emerged over that ridge. Now they get told to charge. Now this poor crossbow line is face to face with these fucking shock troops, right? The Manablitons, etc., right? Volgiers, and they're just on them in a flash, wailing away. And this poor crossbow lady here, she's stabbed, she's speared. And that line of shock troops just bores into the enemy. The other 2 lines, of course, were at least holding the enemy up. And of course, the result you get is a massacre. Now, for sure, I recognize that our army here is stronger than the enemy. Anybody saying, well, look, you're fighting tier 3 archers with tier 4 and 5 infantry. I understand that. But remember, we wasted their elite division at the beginning of the battle. It wasn't like this Valandian force had no good troops. We just used our troops to destroy their force at the beginning of the battle, and now the later stages here is just sort of a formality, right? This is the slaughter for our bloodlust here is we can mow down some of their people. We can get a little javelin practice on the people that are fleeing. Who are you guys chasing? We'll get some skill. We'll get some practice here, right? We'll get a little EXP, try to throw it right in the guy's back, you know, etc. You get an idea. So we're going to have some more of these tactical breakdowns of battles. I'm going to continue to show you guys infantry. We'll cover things like the false gap. That's a strategy that's sort of an ancient strategy where you sort of dupe a large infantry force into coming into a gap and then you destroy them with shock troops. We're going to cover a few more other strategies that you can pull off with infantry that will make you devastating in Bannerlord. So stay tuned for that, friends. I appreciate you guys watching, and we will continue with this breakdown of infantry, cav, and archers here at Tactical Enlightenment. Thanks again for watching, friends. I'll see you guys next time. I might as well show you that, right? So this is at the beginning of the battle, the power level. We'll just sneak this in here at the end. It actually showed them slightly favored to win the battle, and you can see the result here. Because we massacred their cavalry so decisively, you know, the rest of the battle is an absolute massacre. And this is without my character. A lot of people see my character running around, kill 150 people. They're like, yeah, but you're doing most of the work. Well, obviously in this battle I didn't, right? I only got 18 kills, and we totally devastated the enemy here. In Vlandian's home field turf, so to speak, right? So they had every possible ability to win this battle. In fact, I would love to switch sides and play Vlandia in this situation against my own army. Alas, without a mod, something like that isn't possible. But they should have won, or at least they should have had a chance to win. And instead, you have this absolutely destructive massacre, right? This systematic extermination. All right, so we'll wrap it up here. Thanks again for watching, friends. Please subscribe, like, comment, all that kind of good stuff. And I will see you guys next time. All right, actually, we're going to add part 2 of this battle here, or this second battle to this episode. And we're basically going to demonstrate another tactic here called the false gap. I'll get into that in a second, but we've also made things more difficult for us here. I'm going to actually move a lot of our skirmishers, our 6th Corps, into our 8th Corps here so that it's most of these elite units are all sort of together. And then I'll probably be keeping them towards the very back of the fight and not trying to involve them that much. The other thing I did is on the way to find this battle here, these Battanians were sieging. It's the perfect sized force for us to take on. I went to a local castle that I had, and I dumped off a lot of my elite troops. We dumped off about 120 of our tier 5 troops, these Dark Hands and palace guards and whatnot. And at the bottom of the garrison, we were able to pick up a bunch of these scrubby troops, right? These Sea Raider warriors and militia spearmen and warriors and stuff like that. These guys are very low level troops. And this 150 or 130 or so mediocre troops will start to probably simulate what people would have in their army at sort of the middle game of a custom campaign in Bannerlord, right? So we've made this more difficult for us. The other thing I'm going to do here too, just to make sure that it's doing it correctly, is I'm going to change my unit spawn prioritization to lowest level. And what that'll do is at the beginning of the battle, we should have more of these scrubs with fucking bathrobes and whatnot in this battle than if we had it set to high level first. Okay, so we're fighting a Battanian force here. I noticed they had... Yeah, they have 750 infantry and only 250 ranged and 130 cav. So this is kind of perfect to have an infantry on infantry battle. A lot of times Battania has more archers, but for whatever reason, this army has just the right composition for us to have another infantry on infantry battle. Now, this battle map is not optimal. I'm looking it over. I actually wish we were in a little bit more wide open area, but we're going to be able to enact the false gap strategy with this battlefield, even though it's sort of suboptimal from the perspective of setting up. In fact, I can't actually set up my units in the area I want to set up until the battle gets going. I'll be able to use this sort of flat open area for the battle once the battle starts, but before then, I basically want to illustrate what this is going to look like. Oh yeah, I want to do this. Let's get these guys out of there. Let's go ahead and we'll have one captain of the skirmishers. So I'm still going to have a skirmisher division. In fact, they're going to play a vital role. But what we're going to basically do is take all of these other companions and we will dump them. Let's see, I'll put her there, increase melee damage. And we will take all these other companions and we will dump them in the 8th Corps. And then I will keep the 8th Corps largely out of this battle. That way I don't have this huge stack of 40 elite companions totally swinging the battle and giving us a big advantage that way. All right, so we've got our infantry divisions. We actually don't have as many infantry as I was hoping for, and I think the reason for that is that we're so badly outnumbered here. These are my 4 infantry divisions. I have the 1st, the 3rd is shock troops, the 4th is skirmishers, and the 6th is skirmishers. What I want to do actually in this battle is have 3 main divisions. So I'm actually going to shrink the 4th down here to like 5 guys. And frankly, we're just going to put them in the way back. Again, they're not going to matter that much in this battle. But here's the idea of the false gap. This has been shown by other YouTube creators. I'm sure if you've never seen it before, you must be kind of new to exploring YouTube out there. I'm not actually the biggest fan of the false gap because I think there are better tactics. The kill box that I've evolved to work with Bannerlord, I think is a superior option. But be that as it may, I'm still going to show this. And you can see our shock troops, in fact, no longer even look like shock troops. There's a handful of guys in here that are true shock troops that have two-handed weapons. But because we nerfed our army so bad, these guys really don't even fit the true designation of a shock troop. And so this is going to make this battle even harder. Our 1st and 6th divisions, those are going to be the primary anchors. They still have some decent looking troops. Actually, I wonder if I can, let's try to increase, no, so they're already set to highest tier. So I just simply don't have many shock troops for this, which is going to be just fine. There's absolutely going to be nothing wrong with that. We will just roll with this as it is. Okay, so we've got our 1st division, our 6th division, and here's the basic idea. A lot of times, of course, in the medieval, not even the medieval, the ancient era of battle, your infantry divisions would look like this. They would be these stacked up squares, right? You can think of like the Roman legions and stuff like that. That's not very viable for Bannerlord because you want your infantry to envelop the enemy. And if you're in very tight, compacted masses, you get enveloped. The way the game mechanics work in Bannerlord is it's better to have your troops flanking than have them in a really deep line. Now, they had them in really deep lines in ancient history for solidarity, for morale, for a bunch of different reasons. And it's less impactful for Bannerlord, especially once you have a commander that, you know, has some perks, has some leadership, and discourages his units from routing on the battlefield. All right, so the basic idea behind the false gap, and it's a little bit difficult to pull off here with just this small amount of troops, is to have your infantry lines, and I might even tilt them at a little bit of an angle like this. I like to sort of pinch in on the enemy. The enemy will come in and they will start to magnetize to these 2 different sides, right? These 2 different infantry tranches. And then the idea is to bring up your shock troops. And in this case, we're actually going to protect them. We're going to do a little shield and shock with the 2nd cav. I'm not sure how this is going to work because I don't have that many true shock troops. But we're going to do that. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the 8th in a complete reserve back here because these guys on the battlefield right now are the closest thing I have to actual shock troops. These guys have two-handed weapons. I may end up using them in this battle here just in case it doesn't look like it's going to work very well. But the idea is to get the enemy and their big infantry mass to come up here and then split into these 2 forces, right? You can envision the enemy sort of going over there and attacking these 2 forces. Meanwhile, as that happens, you bring up this 2nd cav. This 2nd cav, again, is just a blocker to push the way through for us. And then the 3rd infantry, these shock troops or these quasi-shock troops, will be brought into battle. There are a few Manabliatons in there, so they should be able to do some work. And then you pinch in on one of the enemy sides. Typically, you do one side. Sometimes in ancient warfare, they did both. They would have enough troops to assault both. In fact, I may use the 8th Corps and do that here, right? We may have two different false gap attackers here. And effectively what that does is it splits the enemy, and then more importantly, of course, is it flanks them. Flanking was always something that people tried to do in medieval warfare. And of course, the enemy... or you're always trying to prevent your opponent from flanking, right? That's just a fundamental axiom of war. All right, so we've got our other divisions here. This little 4th division with their 2 guys is not really of substance in this battle. And I'm going to try to use this battlefield down here. We'll let this start playing out a little bit. They've got some distance before they can close in on us. And I'm going to start to set up our false gap. All right, so that's the 1st. That's the 6th, and then again, behind him a good distance, that's the 2nd cav, that's the 3rd, that's our shock troops, and we'll stick the 8th behind them just in case we need them. We'll use them in this battle like a true complete reserve division. Now, just because I have the option, I have the 7th Horse Archers over here, and the 2nd cav over here, and if you look in the comparison of where the 2nd is compared to the 1st, that's our 1st Infantry Division. That second cav is providing them a little bit of protection from cav charges. Botanians are going to have some cav. Actually, they have quite a bit of cav. They have 200 and, or excuse me, they have 110 heavy cav in this battle, and so they're going to be able to use those forces to attack us, probably from the flanks. Now, towards the back here, that's the third, that's the eighth. We're actually going to set up our crossbowmen here on the flank. Excuse me, that's the eighth. Here's the crossbowmen. We'll set them up on the flank. Now, medieval warfare, the development of archers became prominent. But when the false gap was sort of being used in frequency, this is more like the ancient battlefield with leaders like Alexander and Hannibal. When you had these enormous, here's our 4th Division, these two guys. When you had these enormous infantry blocks, and cav was a factor for sure in the ancient era, but archers were not really that big of a factor. They hadn't invented the compound bow, the longbow. They didn't have incredible accuracy or range with arrows, and so they had strange things like slingshotters, and they had the wains. They would run around with the chariots, right? The chariots were fairly effective. And archers, again, weren't really a big factor in the game. So this is not a perfect analog to ancient history, but it's still going to be effective to show you this strategy. All right, so we're forming these guys up into shield wall, like I've mentioned before, preferably about 2 men deep. You don't want them to be enormously thick, because then the enemy will envelop you. But if it's too thin, then your shield wall doesn't protect the guys in the back who have no shields. In fact, this guy holding the flag, you can see him, he has no shield, so he's happy they're in a shield wall like that. Now the enemy, for some reason, and I've noticed this a lot with the AI, they are just charging in here headlong ahead of the main body of troops. So most of these guys just are slaughter, pigs to the slaughter. They don't even defend themselves. I'm not quite certain why it works like that, but now the enemy is starting to form a shield wall in the center. They're starting to form sort of maybe the game is trying to simulate that these are the skirmishers. Unfortunately, real skirmishers would be organized. These guys are coming in like there's Costco samples or something going on here. I'm not quite sure why they're doing that. All right, so now let's see if this plays out kind of like we expect. Here's their main infantry division. It's coming in like a big block. I want to get these guys moved back just a bit, and we'll see if they act sort of like traditional battles did. They would sort of divide themselves between these two infantry forces, and then we can come up here in the center with our false gap, right? So I'm going to move the 2nd Infantry in front of these guys. We'll see if their infantry division now splits. They actually went right past it. And so what do we do here, right? As soon as they're past it now, they've allowed us to surround them, right? This is actually worse for the enemy. They should never be doing what they're doing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our 1st and 6th. This is a little shifting on the fly tactics here. Again, I have weaker level troops. We're bringing these 2 different units in. I'm calling them towards me. And now we're going to have them attack and pinch the enemy here. The enemy basically suicided. It's very strange. I can't actually understand why the enemy did that, but this is the AI. I don't refer to it as artificial intelligence. This is artificial imbecility. You can see from the death spam that even though our 8th Corps is back here not really doing anything, in fact, I'll move them even further out of the battle, the enemy is getting eviscerated here. They had a huge infantry force, but they managed to surround themselves in this instance. And this is also, I guess it's a good example of how even if a battle doesn't seem to be playing out kind of like you expect it to, you can still shift on the fly. You can still do some positive things and hopefully win the battle. Now, I'm still not sure we're going to win this battle, but obviously it's looking productive for us. Over here, I have the horse archers just getting shot. Frankly, they're just kind of bait, right? They're getting pounded over there. But the main infantry battle is the battle I wanted to focus on, and we're at least doing a serviceable job here with our 2 different wings impacting on the enemy. We'll send in the shock troops. The enemy's being largely surrounded. It's sort of turned into a scrum at this stage. It's kind of a chaotic mix of different infantry fighting. These crossbowmen over here have a really nice flanking angle on the enemy. So even though we have lower level troops here, it still looks like a productive exchange. And this is really what battles boil down to. You can think of it like a chess match, right? If you take a rook and lose a pawn, you're winning that portion of the battle. Okay, their archers are pushing up. I don't have a lot of counter to this, so we're just going to continue to sort of spar like we're doing right now. This portion of it has turned decidedly green, right? Our infantry is really doing some good work here. And now, since their archers are closed, we want to bring our guys up
in shield wall. We want to bring a cav line up in shield wall. These look like reinforcements, and we're going to put it right in front of the enemy. And the purpose of that, of course, is helping them close the distance and come to grips with the enemy archers, right? They have Botanian Fiend champs and whatnot. We need to get into there as quickly as we can to attack those guys. I'm still trying to just leave my 8th Corps out of this battle. The 5th crossbowmen are over there. We're going to have them charge. Any of those guys that are out of ammo, we want those guys, those crossbowmen with their shields up, we want them charging in battle here too, right? No reason we can't use that advantage. Now our infantry here, especially these low-level infantry, weakened between that infantry battle and now all of these archers, looks to be dissolving at this stage. I am getting reinforcements. I don't really want the enemy attacking our 8th Corps because they're so strong. Our 8th Corps really can decimate an already weakened foe. But let's look at the results for that. Let's just take a peek. I'm not actually going to continue the rest of this battle. We'll just sort of consider this first half the subject of our examination today. And as you can see, we suffered 100 and, it's about 200, and they've suffered almost 600. Even though they outnumbered us, even though they had the terrain advantage shooting downhill like this, even though we didn't really use our 8th Corps. Our 8th Corps is like out of the battle over there. We had mid-level troops for a lot of our positions. You can see some of these guys are very low level. This is like tier 2, tier 3 archers that are advancing now. A lot of our infantry was mediocre as well. We took out a lot of our elite shock troops, and using this false gap. Now, ironically, the enemy didn't act precisely like I expected with the false gap. Part of that is I'm not a false gap, I guess, purveyor. I do not use the false gap very often. I use a kill box because the kill box is more of a surround and destroy tactic than I feel the false gap is. Right now, the false gap is a more simplistic, less complicated tactic. But as you can see here, they didn't even take the bait, right? They just ran right past the false gap and attacked our sort of main body of infantry. It's possible that they were trying to get to our crossbowmen. The AI sort of assesses threats and then decides what to do from that point on. But for whatever reason, we were able to adapt. And I can show you how a false gap, if you're pulling it off and the enemy just bypasses it and heads in, well, then you just bring those two wings and collapse upon the enemy. And what you have is a modified sort of watered down kill box. So we'll attach this to the other video. I'm kind of doing these in fits and starts to try to make it as useful as possible for you guys out there. In fact, the enemy just routed. So even though we were outnumbered here, even though we had mid-tier troops, even though for the most part our 8th Corps wasn't a major impact, you can see they got a few kills here and there. This is a total destruction of a much larger Botanian force. So hopefully that's a benefit to you guys. We'll continue on with this series. I've got a few more tactics to show with infantry, and we will continue on, friends. Thanks again for watching.